Okay, coterminal and reference angles. Two different types of angles. Reference angle is an angle always in the first quadrant. Every angle has a reference angle. So if you do a 150 degree angle, that's 150 degrees. The angle left over is 30. So the question is, are those equal? Well, in second quadrant, sine's positive, and the first quadrant, sine's always positive. So they're equal. So 240. So what's the reference angle? Well, 240 degrees is all the way here. That's 60 degrees. So this is the opposite of the cosine of 60. The tangent of 300. 300 is all the way over here. That's 300. The angle left is 60. So this is the opposite of the tangent of 60. Because the tangent of 60 is positive, tangent of 300 is negative. The sine of 90, there is no reference angle. There is no reference angle. You have to know that the sine of 90 is 1. 5 pi over 4. So we have to know what quadrant 5 pi over 4 is in. So let's 5 pi over 4. So if you go all the way to here, that's pi. So that's 4 pi over 4. Keep going. And so 5 pi over 4 would be in the third quadrant. So in the third quadrant, the reference angle is pi over 4. And they're the opposite because sine of pi over 4 is negative and the sine of pi over 4 is positive. 2 pi over 3. So 2 pi over 3 is in this quadrant. So this is the same as pi over 3. Tangent of 5 pi over 6 is related to the tangent of pi over 6. Cosine of 11 pi over 6 is related to the cosine of pi over 6. Okay, so now comes the fun part. Coterminal. So we have to understand this idea of reference angles. Okay. This is an angle. This is 30 degrees. So show me what 390 degrees looks like. Well, 390 means you start here, you go all the way around 360, and then 30 more. So 390 is the same as 30. Now, I can also, so what if I want to do another one in the positive direction? So here's the deal. So instead of just going around once, I can go all the way around again, then back. So that would be 720 plus 30, which would be 750 degrees, which is the same as 30. So 390, 750, and 30 are coterminal angles. They all stop at the same point. Now, negative angles. So in negative angles, you start here, whoops, new color, and we're going to go backwards. So that angle starts the same place on the x-axis and ends at on the same line. So that's 360 minus 30, which is negative 330, because we're going backwards. We're going clockwise. So that's coterminal with 30. Once I do that, so that's negative 330, then I can keep going around again and add another 360 to that. So that would be negative 690. It's 30 degrees short of 720. So those are coterminal angles. So the trick is you just add 360 and subtract 360. So here goes. Same thing. Two positive ones. So pi over 6. So if you take pi over 6 and add 2 pi, that's pi over 6 plus 12 pi over 6 is 13 pi over 6. So this is pi over 6. 13 pi over 6 would go all the way around and stop there. So if you wanted like another one, you just add 4 pi. So that becomes pi over 6 plus 24 pi over 6, which is 25 pi over 6. So that starts here, goes all the way around once, twice, and then ends there. Okay, so go backwards. So take pi over 6 and subtract 2 pi. So pi over 6 minus 12 pi over 6 is negative 11 pi over 6. Pi over 6 minus 4 pi would be pi over 6 minus 24 pi over 6 would be negative 23 pi over 6. These are all coterminal angles with pi over 6. Give every coterminal angle to 50 degrees. So you can do 50 degrees plus 360n or minus 360n. So this is a way of giving every possible answer. You add or subtract 360 degrees. For radians, it's pi over 7 plus or minus 2 pi over n. So like whatever you let n be, n could be 1, n could be 2. This is an expression for every possible angle. Okay. Match an angle in each column to a coterminal angle or equivalent angle in the next column. 45 degrees. Pi over 4. Pi over 3. Pi over 3 is 60 degrees. So that's like negative 300 degrees. Okay, so negative 300 goes with pi over 6. 60 degrees. Negative 300. Nah, not pi over 6. What am I doing? Negative 300. Pi over 3 is the same as 60 degrees. And 60 degrees is the same as 7 pi over 3 because that's really 6 pi over 3 plus pi over 3. That's really 2 pi plus pi over 3. So they're all connected. You see that? So that's what you got to do. So try to play connect the dots, and then when you're done, I'll let you. Alright, so kind of go through and see if you found all the conversions. These are all coterminal angles. You should be able to like work your way through them all. Okay. Now let's press each in terms of its reference angles. So the sine of 145. So you think of 145. So you think of 145 degrees is like right here. The angle left over is 35. So this is the sine of 35. Cosine of 3 pi over 4. So 3 pi over 4 is right here. That's 3 pi over 4. So how much is left? You just subtract from pi. That's pi over 4. And they're the opposite of each other because cosine is negative in that quadrant. So sine of 290. So 290. So this is 270. 290 is right here. So that's 290. The reference angle, what's left is 70. So this is the sine of 70. And they're the opposite of each other because sine is negative. Cosine of 5 pi over 6. 5 pi over 6 is in this quadrant. 5 pi over 6. So what's left? Pi over 6. So this is the cosine of pi over 6. And cosine of 5 pi over 6 is negative. So it's the opposite of cosine of pi over 6. The tangent of 80 is the tangent of 80. They're in the same quadrant. Reference angles are all in the first quadrant. So this is going to be the tangent of pi over 4. 7 pi over 4, pi over 4. So 7 pi over 4 is in the fourth quadrant. So tangent's negative in that quadrant. So it has to be the negative of that. Secant of 3 pi over 4. So think of cosine. Right? So think of the secant of pi over 4. 3 pi over 4 is in quadrant 2. So these are opposite. Cosecant of 242. So you got to figure out what quadrant that's in. So if you subtract 180, you get 62. So this is related to the cosecant of 62. Now in that quadrant, we have to have a negative because it's in the third quadrant. 171. That's just short of 180. So this is like the tangent of 9 degrees. And it's the opposite. cotangent of 93. So that's just 3 degrees past the 90-degree mark. So it's going to be opposite of the cotangent, because in the second quadrant, cotangent's negative. So we have to take, we're missing like 87 degrees. Okay, now these are in radians. Oh, you got to think of cosine of 3. 3 is like, if you think about pi is 3.14. So this is the opposite of the cosine of pi minus 3. That's the angle left. 3 would be almost all the way over here. That's 3. And this is what's left over, and that is pi minus 3. Cosecant of 11 pi over 6. So that's going to be the cosecant. Let me erase all that. That's going to be the cosecant of pi over 6. Now this is in the fourth quadrant, so I need a negative. Tangent of 400. Well, if I subtract 360, that's like the tangent of 40. Well, they're both positive. Tangent of 400 is coterminal with tangent of 40. Negative 480. So you add 360 to that, so you get negative 120. So this is, oh good Lord, heavens. Okay, so that freaked me out. My wife walked up behind me while I was doing this, and it just freaked me. So like all of a sudden, I jumped. So this is like the sine of negative 120. So negative 120, that is like an angle going backwards, negative 120 degrees, negative 120. There it is. So this is 60. So this is like the opposite of the sine of 60. You have to work your way through all this stuff. So 1100 degrees. Oh, give me a break. 1100 degrees. So, like, you have 360, 720, and then you have 1080. So take away 1008. So this is like the sine of 20. Same angle. Secant, so we're thinking of cosine, but that's okay. So add 360. So that's like the secant of negative 340. So negative 340 would be like running around, like almost back around. So that's just going to be the same. So this is like 340 negative, so that leaves 20. So this is going to be like the secant of 20. Cosine of 9 pi over 2. So 9 pi over 2's like, those are like the cute ones. So if you take 9 pi over 2 and subtract 4 pi over 2, you get 5 pi over 2. That's still too big. Subtract another 4 pi over 2. That's like pi over 2. So this is like the cosine of pi over 2. By the way, that's 0. 23 pi over 6, that's not going to be like the tangent of pi over 6. So you just got to figure out where 23 pi over 6 is. Well, 24 pi over 6 is 4 pi. So that's running around twice. So running around twice, there's 2 pi, there's 4 pi, then pi over 6. So they're equal to each other. 23 pi over 6. Well, just a minute. I'm sorry. So 24. So 23 pi over 6 would be down here. So this is like the opposite, the negative. 24 pi over 6 would be 2 complete circles. Let's try that again with feeling. So this would be 2 pi. This would be 4 pi. That's 24 pi over 6. But we only want 23 pi over 6, so we're pi over 6 short. So that's the opposite. So 17 pi over 3. Okay, so you got to take away multiples of 6 pi over 3. That's 2 pi. 12 pi over 3 is 4 pi. That leaves you the sine of 5 pi over 3, which is related to the sine of pi over 3. 5 pi over 3 is in the fourth quadrant, so it's the opposite. 23 pi over 6, well, that's the same problem as above. That's negative tangent of pi over 6. I wanted to see if I was paying attention. Find the exact value of each using the reference angle. Okay, so the sine of 3 pi over 4 is like the sine of pi over 4, which is 1 over root 2. The tangent of 3 pi over 2 is undefined. Because tangent is sine over cosine, so that would be like the sine of 3 pi over 2 over the cosine of 3 pi over 2, which would be negative 1 over 0. That's undefined. Cotangent of negative pi over 6. Okay, so like here's like me getting confused. So I ignore that. I think of the tangent of negative pi over 6. Because I know that one. And so I know that's negative tangent of pi over 6. Pi over 6 is 30 degrees. So this is 1 over root 3 negative, so this is negative root 3. Secant of 330. Well, I think of the cosine of 330, which is equal to the cosine of 30, which is root 3 over 2, and this is the reciprocal, 2 over root 3. The cotangent of negative 90. See, now tangent and cotangent have issues, so like negative 90, so if you think of the sine of the tangent of negative 90, which is sine over cosine, negative 1 over 0, which is undefined. If you flip that over, though, that's 0 over negative 1, that's 0. The secant of negative 60, that's like the cosine of negative 60, which is just a negative angle, so negative 60 is rotating down. This is 60 degrees, so this is like 1, this is root 3, and this is 2, and that's negative. So the secant would be 2. The sine of 360, so take away 360, so that's the sine of 240, right? Which is related to the sine of 60. 240 is in the third quadrant, so it's negative. So this is negative root 3 over 2. The cosine of negative 390. That's like the cosine of negative 30. Or the cosine of 330, which is 1/2. I'm sorry, cosine of 330, that's 60. Cosine of 330? Oh, no, that's only 30 degrees. Whoops, that's root 3 over 2. Cosine of 330, that's equal to the cosine of 30. Tangent of 11 pi over 4, well, if you subtract 8 pi over 4, that's one complete cycle. That's like the tangent of 3 pi over 4, which is negative 1. It's in the second quadrant. The sine of negative 7 pi over 3, so 6 pi over 3, so that's like the sine of negative pi over 3. So negative pi over 3 is right here. That's like negative 60 degrees. So that's going to be negative root 3 over 2. Okay. Okay, good little review problem. The coordinates of the point P are 0 something. The function is y equals a to the x. And if you put in 4, you get 16. So a to the 4th equals 16. You want the coordinates of P. I'm sorry, I already solved another guy. So you want the coordinates of P. Well, if you put in 0, y equals a to the 0 is 1. So the coordinates of point P are 0, 1. Find the value of a. Well, 16 equals a to the 4th. So a equals the 4th root of 16. So a is 2. So the formula, so this is actually y equals 2 to the x. Okay, given that the log base 5 of x equals y, express each of the following in terms of y. So the log base 5 of x is y. So this is 2 times the log base 5 of x. But the log base 5 of x is y. So this is 2y. This is the log base 5 of x to the negative first, which is negative 1 the log base 5. So this is of x. This is negative y. So I need to change the bases somehow. So this is equal to the log base 5 of x over the log base 5 of 25. Well, log base 5 of x is y. Log base 5 of 25 is 2. Y over 2. All right. There we go.